Discussing the historic agreement by the United States and Cuba to normalize relations after 50 years. We just heard from a former U.S. Secretary of Commerce on why he opposes U.S. President Obama's announcement, but there are others who think it's time for both nations to put their past behind them. Joining me in the studio to discuss this is Eric Farnsworth, Vice President at the Council of the Americas, and from Miami we have Domingo Amuchastegui. He is a research associate at the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Eric, we just heard from the former Secretary of Commerce there saying that this is a big victory for Cuba, symbolic, diplomatic, call it what you will. There's not much in it for the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it remains to be seen what the ultimate outcome of this is going to be. We just had the announcement yesterday, and we haven't begun the implementation phase. But having said that, the Secretary did refer to the fact that, for example, when President Obama goes to the next Summit of the Americas in April in Panama, that the dynamic will have changed, will have shifted, will have become more favorable to the United States, will have shown that, in fact, the United States is not responsible for all the failures of the hemisphere necessarily, or certainly the failures of the Cuban Revolution. That has proven to be an excuse not just for Cuba, but frankly for other countries in the hemisphere at hemispheric leaders meetings and summits and gatherings such as that for many, many years. So this takes that off the table, at least in the near term. So I think that there are going to be some things that the President will be able to point to. But again, the longer term impact and what practically this will mean on the ground in Cuba, I think, of course, will remain to be seen.
Domingo, in Miami, those opposing the normalization of relations with Cuba say that by this announcement, the United States has lost whatever leverage it had with the Cuban government, that it cannot now influence the Cuban government. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree with the notion of the government of the United States renouncing or betraying any particular principle of its foreign policy. What President Obama has said is aimed at normalizing bilateral relations between two nations. Otherwise, the other issues, such as support to domestic opposition, support for a change of government, support for democracy and human rights and everything else, that was reinstated by President Obama's announcement yesterday. So I don't understand why these arguments, in the sense that it's treason is a win situation for the Cuban government. No, I think that the approach should be that we are looking for normalcy, going back to normal relations between two nations. And if this other nation, the United States, wants to support domestic opposition, it's their choice. The Cuban government is more than willing to discuss any issues with the American government, with the American authorities. There's no win situation for the Cuban government. It should not be the approach. The approach should be that both nations are working for normalcy.
Let's go to Havana now. We are joined by Carlos Iglesias. He is a Cuban journalist based in the Cuban capital. Carlos, thanks for joining us. Well, the dust is now settling. This is beginning to sink in. What are the expectations among ordinary Cubans from this announcement?
Well, I think this is a very important moment, historical, they have said here in Havana, because after more than half a century, now there is a dramatic change in the Cuban-American relations. This change was not expected at all. When it was announced that President Raúl Castro was going to talk on TV, everybody thought that maybe it was the swap of Mr. Alan Gross and the Cuban prisoners in American jails. But nobody was able to feel that there was going to be this dramatic change, as I repeat, because this is something that, for example, many Cubans have lived their lives under the blockade, under the embargo, and they don't understand life in another way, and this is completely different than previously to December 17.
That's right, Eric. This was kept under wraps. There was no leak. These negotiations have been going on for a long time. We didn't hear about it. But earlier on, you mentioned that we would have to see how this develops, where it goes to from here. Do you see any major obstacles coming up?
Well, there are a couple obstacles, sure, both bureaucratic and also political. And by bureaucratic, I mean for over 50 years, the United States government has been geared toward isolating Cuba at the very senior levels, but also down to the level of people who actually implement policy. And so you actually have to overturn years, not just of regulations and requirements in terms of implementation of laws, et cetera, but you also have to have individuals do that and really seek to implement the president's will. That sometimes takes a little bit of time. There are also political challenges. Clearly, the Secretary referred to the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, both in January will be taken by the Republicans, who have made clear, I think, that they're not fully enthusiastic with the news from yesterday in terms of the president's announcement. But you also have leading Democrats who have come out in opposition. So,
but on the other hand, U.S. business will be welcoming this.
Well, U.S. business has welcomed this, yes, and you saw statements of support from some large organizations and in support. You have to remember, look, Cuba is a population of 11 million of impoverished citizens, which have been isolated from the global economy for a long time. So again, we have to keep expectations in check. I mean, business will not immediately take off. You won't be sending billions of dollars to the island anytime soon. It's going to be incremental. Infrastructure has to be improved. You have to have a legal structure to allow that to occur. You have to work out labor rights, labor issues. There are lots of things that need to happen before the economic relationship with Cuba really would be able to flourish, if indeed that happens down the line. What happened yesterday was really the first step that potentially could take you toward that direction.
All right, Domingo, there is one opinion that we're hearing about this announcement, and that says that by the U.S. government making this announcement to normalize relations with Cuba, it's going to encourage what's termed pro-democracy forces in Cuba, that it's going to lead to a Western-style democracy, multi-party democracy in Cuba. Is that likely?
I don't see that scenario or no time in the near future, basically for two reasons. One is that the current outcome of these arrangements are having a very negative impact on local opposition in Cuba. Their whole set of arguments, ideas are just collapsing. And in the second place, the United States might want to continue, as President Obama has stated, to support all these different groups and factions, and yet, for how many years this support has been going on and on and on with millions and millions and millions of dollars, and no effective result, no effective development, no effective challenge has come from this so-called dissident movement or opposition groups.
Carlos, let me get your opinion on that, the opposition in Cuba. The United States Senator, the Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who is fiercely opposed to this deal, he said that this announcement by President Obama has let down many people in Cuba. Is that the case? Is that what you're hearing?
Well, you know, we have been living here in Cuba under a very complicated system. And I think both sides will have to make a long way to complete this success of this first step. They, for example, Obama will have to go through a hostile Congress. Cuba will have to make some changes in their system to comply with this new situation. So I'm not able to say right now what will happen. And this is the feeling for many Cubans, that we must be cautious because it's just the first step in a long way.
So, Eric, a long way to go, but this announcement has been universally welcomed in Latin America. When we've had positive statements from Latin American countries. Is that going to change the relationship that the United States has with that continent?
I think potentially yes, and in fact the symbolism of this has not been lost on the region. Again, Cuba has been a North Star, if you want to put it that way, for some in Latin America who choose to see the United States as a malevolent force in the Western Hemisphere. I obviously don't take that view, but it has been a tool for those who want to promote an anti-American message. If you take that away, now you can have a more healthy discussion, if you want to put it that way, in the context of economic development, economic growth, shared interests around the energy agenda, around the trade agenda, other things, and you take away that that thorn in the side, which has been allowed to divide the United States from some in the Western Hemisphere for some time. So, yeah, I think it will change the relationship. And again, it's the type of thing where if you take away excuses, then you can really focus on what's really important, what really needs to be addressed for the long-term development of the region. And I think this really goes to the heart of that question.
Right. Domingo, we talk about the United States changing its policy, but Cuba also changed its policy by agreeing to this. What was the motivation in the Cuban government for this change, for this to happen?
It is quite clear that for the last 25
Sorry, Carlos, I'll
years...
get you in a moment. Go ahead, Domingo.
For the last 25 years, you have to be absolutely blind not to see how much the Cuban system and Cuban politics have changed. The country is very, very different in many ways today. In every aspect, land ownership, cooperatives, private ownership, you name it, investments, Mariel, freedom to travel, and you could enumerate a number of significant changes. You don't want to see it, that's your call. But the one thing that I can assure you, and I just got back from there, is that this country is becoming a very different country in many, many different ways. The implications for the future will have to be discussed as they come along. Meanwhile, it is absurd to deny the fact that Cuba is changing step by step.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CCTV America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being